Welcome, viewers, to another episode of COVIDCASTJA. We are at episode 28, and today we're talking about the Data Protection Act. If you are joining us for the first time, it means that you've missed 27 episodes, and we encourage you to go to our YouTube page. Also, right here on our Facebook page, all our episodes are available. But better yet, we have smallbusinessportal.com, on which you can find all episodes of COVIDCASTJA, but you find also very helpful business tips on just about every topic. So business tips on where you can get funding, how to approach getting a loan. Also, for COVIDCASTJA, every week we issue a memo. Do you have your memos? If you have not signed up for your memo, please email us at sme@psoj.org. You may also go to smallbusinessportal.com and you can find copies of all our memos. Through COVIDCASTJA, however you learn, and this is a show, an educational show where we try to break things down into simple language so that you can understand and you can be better equipped to run your business. So this week, we're talking about data protection. And the passage of a statute is not necessarily the most exciting bit of information. The passage of the Data Protection Act, however, and most legislation is usually very important, and a lot of these things have serious implications for our business. So today we're actually joined by two data protection experts, and we're just going to be having a conversation today about what is in this Data Protection Act, when will it come into effect, what do we need to be doing with our businesses as we prepare. And we are joined first by a gentleman who I know very well. We are actually not relatives, though we have the same last name. He's Chukwuemeka Cameron. Tonight we're just going to call him Chuck. He's an attorney at law and founder of Design Privacy. Now, Chuck has been talking for years about the importance of data protection long before the bill had even come into place. So he's a pioneer in the industry. He's a well-experienced attorney with 21 years at the Jamaican bar and has a history of working in regulatory compliance in the telecom and financial industries. He is an extremely skilled privacy law, commercial law, and administrative lawyer. And among other notable cases, such as the recent Privy Council case win against Indepth, he successfully filed 2 constitutional motions for privacy against the government of Jamaica and was the consultant on the first prosecution under the Cyber Crimes Act. Chuck is not just an attorney, and he's actually no stranger to technology, as he has a master's in information technology and management from a university in Rotterdam that I cannot pronounce, and I am not going to slaughter it. When he comes on, he's going to tell us that name, with a focus on data protection, and completed an advanced masterclass training in 29 as a data protection officer. Very important. We are going to be talking about data protection officers today. From an ISO certified provider of IT governance in the United Kingdom. So please let us welcome Chuck Cameron.
Hi, Rochelle.
Hi, Chuck.
I know of your oratory skills, but you have never presented me before. And anytime I'm making any presentation, just tell me how much it costs. I want you.
I am officially your hype woman.
Definitely.
Now, our other guest is a gentleman, Andrew Nooks. He is Director of Efficiency and Growth at Simtai Consulting Limited. And I must confess that I recently attended a data protection training. And during the training, I sent a message to say that we have to have Andrew Nooks on this program. Now, Andrew is a leader in information security assurance and advisory services, where he has a responsibility at Simtai for efficiency, growth, innovation, and disruption. We love to hear about that. He has over 25 years of experience in information systems audit, security, and data protection, and has provided advisory services in areas such as IT governance review, implementation, information security assessment, security incident response, and forensics. He has a BSc in computer science and mathematics, so I'm good on the maths, from the University of the West Indies, and he holds certification from industry leading organizations. Welcome, Andrew Nooks. I'm very excited about tonight. We have two key data protection experts, and we have them discussions coming from the legal side of data protection and from the IT side. But both gentlemen have so much experience across the board that we can have a great conversation. So hi, Shelley. Shelley and Elliot is one of our weekly viewers. Happy to see you. Shelley, please get your questions ready. Now, gentlemen, the passage of the Data Protection Act, I know for big businesses have started kind of saying, wow, we really need to do something about this. But let me just start with this Data Protection Act, Chuck. In summary, what does this Data Protection Act provide?
It's very simple. It tells us that one is all the personal data we have in our business, we don't own it. They belong to our customers, our employees, or our suppliers. That's first base. The second thing is you must protect that data, because if you do not protect that data, you'll be breaching somebody's constitutional right. So what the legislation does is tells you what steps you must take to safely and lawfully process that data. And in addition to that, it sets out what rights are attached to the data that you hold. And it just says, okay, and somebody is going to be overlooking it. That's it. I usually use an analogy and say, you know, have crown jewels in your business. Those crown jewels don't belong to you. They belong to somebody else. And the law has told you how you must safeguard those crown jewels and what rights the owner has over those crown jewels. That's it.
Jewels is data.
The personal data.
When we're talking about data, and I'll give you a quick joke. When Data Protection Act came out, somebody said to me, what is this data that they're talking about? Because, you know, nowadays, because we talk so much about data on our phones, people forget that data is not just capacity, it's not just, you know, how much megabytes on your phone. So, Andrew, in terms of this concept of data, what data are we talking about?
You're on mute, Andrew.
Andrew, you're on mute.
As per usual. Yeah. Thank you very much for the introduction, Rochelle. Chuck, good to see you.
Yes, sir. Present.
And I happy you enjoyed the presentation. I hope I won't disappoint the others who have come to see what you have experienced. The data that we're talking about in relation to the Data Protection Act is personally identifiable information. And that usually is your name, address, your banking information, your passport number. But in a modern era, the information has evolved. So now your social media handle becomes a part of information that can identify you. Your photograph, location data you can put some of those information together to pinpoint where a particular person is. So it is considered personal data depending on how you aggregate the data. Then you have, as a part of that, sensitive data that relates to the person. We're talking about biometrics, medical records, political affiliation, ethnicity, trade union membership, sexual orientation. All those are classified as sensitive data, and the Data Protection Act is talking about how we should treat with that data.
Okay. So Chuck, how should we be treating with that data? So I have a small business, and I sell to. I have a group of customers that I have their email address, I have their WhatsApp information, of course I have their phone numbers. I send blasts to them on a regular basis to tell them what products and services I have, and sometimes I will call them My computer system, of course, is picking up different information, aggregating that information that I can send out the blast. Now that I have this data, what should I be thinking about now with the protection of this data? What are my responsibilities regarding this data?
So remember when I said initially, it is not your information. And what I'm sure we heard about the NITS case. And that's where our Chief Justice said the personal data, that those crown jewels that you have, if you use them without authorization, you're more than likely breaching one's constitutional rights. So before you do anything with any of the personal data, you must have a lawful basis for doing so. I give an example. Everybody, if it is police were to come to your house, kick off your door, and conduct a search without a warrant, that would be an unlawful restriction of your privacy. However, if you went to a judge and said, this is what I'm looking for, and this is why I think it is there, and the judge issue a search warrant, and he then goes to your house, presents you with that warrant, and conducts a search, it will also be a restriction of your right to privacy, but it would be a lawful restriction of your right to privacy. How is that relevant to what I'm saying now?
They will come and say, nobody not going to kick off my door. I'm not hear nobody else. Tell us how that really works.
Hold on. The commissioner has the power to do it with a warrant, but that's not what I'm speaking about now. What I'm speaking about, because if you use that personal data without authorization or lawful basis, without more, if you store it, if you copy it, if you print it, if you do anything with it without a lawful basis, they are breaching the Data Protection Act and they are breaching their constitutional rights. So that you start from a position of having an obligation to justify, why do I have this data and what lawful basis do I have to treat with it? And secondly, having decided that I have a lawful basis, have I properly notified the owner of this personal data of what I'm doing with it? So that's the first data processing standards. And there are 7-8 data processing standards that must be followed. But that's just the first one. What reason do I have, what permission or authorization do I have to have this in my system, any at all? Why am I collecting it? And then, okay, I want to call them. What lawful basis do I have to use it any at all? So that's first base.
So having collected this data, because as business people, we're going to have to collect data because we're going to need to reach our customers. So the statute is not saying that I must not be able to know my customer's name and how to reach them. What is it actually saying? How I treat with it? I have to get their consent to store their data, and I have to let them know how I'm going to use the data.
Hi, Leslie. So it's not only so if you build your business on consent, anything that can be given can be freely taken away. So for my clients, I said don't focus on consent, because if your entire business is premised on that, if they say don't use my data, that's the end of your business. So there are other lawful bases. So if you want to come to me for my services, as part of delivering the service, I need to get information from you as part of the delivery of the service for me to enter into a contract. So that's one of the first and most relevant reasons for processing data, and that is the purpose of entering into a contract to fulfill a service. So the legislation comes from the GDPR, and it is really meant to facilitate.
So you remember, we know the GDPR. What's that?
That's the European version of our legislation, the General Data Protection Regulation, that was implemented in 2018, passed in 2016. The reason why I reference that is because one of the primary objectives of the GDPR which we have not emphasized in our legislation, is that it's supposed to facilitate business, making the sharing of personal data easier. That is one of the primary objectives. So it's not to lock down your business, make it harder for you to do business. It is going to be painful. Can't hide from that, because we do not have a culture of privacy.
Yes.
But once you follow the data processing standards, it will be easier to do business locally and internationally.
And I think that's a key point. Andrew, I'm actually going to go over to just to switch to you for a moment.
Sure.
And this conversation, you know, when we use these words like privacy, and
Yes.
sometimes when we think about privacy, we think about privacy in the way that, you know, I close the door so that I can get privacy.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what is this privacy that we're talking about? And I think we have a quick slide that looks at it that we could just raise, and you could just talk us through what
Sure.
is privacy about.
No worries. So privacy is the right to be left alone, or freedom from interference or intrusion. That's privacy generally. So when you spoke about, you know, closing the door or something, then, you know, you're saying, listen, I don't want to be disturbed. But then in this context, we're talking about data or information privacy, and it's really the right to have some control over how your personal information is being collected, and used. And it goes through a life cycle, as you know, Chuck would mention that you have to have you are the owner of the data, and you have to have some say in how your data is used. But then there will be exceptions to that, because if you enter in a contract, you know, you can't just tell somebody that after entering into that contract that I don't want you to use my data anymore. You may have a loan or something that, you know, your data has to be processed in order to service that loan. You can't just go in and say stop using this.
Yes.
So it's really about the collection, the use, the storage, the transmission, and the retention and deletion of the data. So it takes it through our entire life cycle, from collection to disposal.
Okay, thank you for that. We actually just did a poll. Mags, I see your questions. You asked two good questions. One of them is about how patients' electronic records will be protected. So we're going to get back to that. We did a poll. Did you know about the Data Protection Act before this episode? And 91% of the respondents said yes, and only 9% said no. So that's really good to see. I see Chris record on. So that's excellent.
Big up, Chris.
That
Big up, Chris.
So you mentioned that there were 8 particular points coming out of the Data Protection Act. You dealt with one of them earlier. Can you just quickly take us through them? You're on mute.
Yeah, I couldn't wait to say that back to you.
I'm not going on mute again. So the first one is, as I mentioned, it must be done lawfully and fairly.
Okay.
So we understand that. The second one is that you must only keep personal data for a specified purpose, for a specific purpose. So gone are the days where you are collecting data for time immemorial, just in case. For each piece of personal data you collect, you must have a documented retention policy in how long you're going to keep this data. You must only collect the information you need. So if you want to purchase something from a retail store, they do not need your telephone number, they do not need your address, they don't even need to know your name. So the question is, if I'm collecting this information, what is the basis why is it necessary for them to collect this? One of the big ones and I'm going to jump to the 7th standard. And this is, I believe this is where Andrew really comes into play, is the law now requires you to ensure that you have the requisite technical and organizational measures in place to protect that data. And protecting it means ensuring that it's kept confidential, maintaining the integrity and the availability. And after you have put those measures in place, you have to ensure that you test those things that you put in place. That's what the law says. And that is what is really the game changer that you cannot get around. Other technicals, other processing standards are you must ensure that you keep the data accurate and up to date. The eighth processing standard is that once you are transferring data outside of Jamaica, and transferring data outside of Jamaica means using Dropbox or email or cloud-based email or anything like that. That's what transferring data outside of Jamaica is. You must ensure that they have the adequate protection in place. And the sixth data processing standard, I don't remember, and I'm sure Andrew is going to help me.
Yeah, I think it has to do with the observance of the rights of the data subject.
Correct. So what it says, and that is a big catch-all. That was very simple. But what that says, remember I said the law has now given the owners of the personal data a lot of rights. The law says if you do not put systems in place to allow the data subject to exercise those rights, that's a data breach. So, for example, if the first right is I have a right to know what data you have on me, and I have a right to ask you for that data. If you do not have systems in place to facilitate that, you are in breach of the law.
Okay.
So it is very far-reaching. There's nothing intuitive in these rights, but that comes naturally.
Yeah, and one of the misconceptions is through the law. Most persons look at it in the context of digital information, but it speaks about data in any filing system. So whether it be in a digital format or you have it in a filing cabinet somewhere, it still comes under protection under Data Protection Act.
And actually, Max had asked a question about telemedicine. So I think that was an important point, Andrew, because it's not just the data that's being collected for digital storage, which I think is what most of us have in mind, because everything is so digital. But it's all the data in the filing drawers, the data that you just stick a piece of paper in books.
Yes.
Once you've collected information on your customers, name, gender, age, when you have things like people's TRN numbers, do you even need TRN numbers? Andrew, one of the things I want you to touch on is approach to privacy, and I think you also have a slide on that, and then we can start talking about privacy governance, because I know that as people are listening, they're saying, but wow, what does all mean for me? Why is it important?
Well, the whole thing is that data now is the new oil or the new gold or the crown jewels, as some would put it. And as data technology becomes more sophisticated, you find that data becomes very front and center. Data is being used to determine the outcomes of elections. They are used to drive customers to your site. You look at data from the perspective of personalizing your offerings, because in a competitive landscape, we're not competing on a global landscape. So if we don't pay attention to personalized services, then we're going to lose out on quite a bit of our client base. So you find that persons are processing data for the purposes of offering a more personalized service, and others are processing it for other means. I don't know if persons have watched The Social Dilemma and seeing the whole processing of information that has gotten our people hooked and like a drug on digital devices.
Yes.
So Rochelle, I'd like to share another view on the information governance aspect and why it's necessary to form part of that governance framework. And we don't focus on this, but we can't ignore the sanctions that are attached with any of this data breach. And the sanctions we're speaking about, you can be faced with criminal sanction and some serious fine up to 4% of your annual gross revenue. So how is that tied back to governance? So if it is you're running a business, business is about managing your risks. There is no bigger risk than being faced with a fine of that amount or being faced with the possibility of jail. So it must, if you have a monthly meeting, even if you're a one-man shop or a two-man shop, it must be a concern of you. What systems have you put in place to ensure that you minimize your exposure? So it must form part of your governance framework. If you're a multinational company, it must form part of your board discussion. It's no longer IT discussion. It is as important as knowing that you have enough, that you have enough product to sell. It is more important than that at this stage, given the exposure.
So just to put things into context, though, in terms of the passage of the act, exactly where are we now? The act has been passed. Is it in effect?
Just one comment before you go to that. From the Jamaican perspective, and Chuck mentioned 4%, 4% of your global turnover. That applies to the GDPR, but the GDPR is far-reaching, right? But you also have all local laws that talks about 10% of your global revenue. And for most organizations, if you're looking at their bottom line, their profit margin would be wiped out for those who are making a profit. So it is something to pay attention. And you find that the persons with responsibility, the directors and all that, may be subject to prison sentences if the data subject rights are breached.
Yes. So Chuck, are those sanctions currently in effect?
So as of July, it was assented to by the Governor General. So the process is passed through the lower house, passed through the Senate, then goes to the Governor General for assent, and the last step is for it to be gazetted or just printed by the Jamaican printing press. When I checked the printing office about 10 days ago, it has not been gazetted as yet. So but that is really a formality in light of the government pressing ahead with needs and the understanding that this has to be in place before. I would take it for granted that we now need to be paying attention to it because all the bigger steps have been completed. It's now just a question of printing house, printing it literally.
Okay. There's a 12-month period though.
So what the legislation provides for is a 2-year transition period in general. But what we don't focus on is the fact that the legislation also makes provision for the minister at his discretion to implement it how he sees fit. So how I interpret that, because it's really left up to interpretation, is we can rest assured that we may not be sanctioned within the next 2 years. However, you may be required to register within the next 13 months. And our registration does require it to get your house fully in order, even to register. So I don't want us to focus on a 2-year time span. After the 2 years, you can be sanctioned, but we don't know what we will be required to do before that.
Okay, so this is the get your house in order time. This is the Data Protection Act coming to visit your house. So you need to start put out the good sheet, them sweep up the place. So
exactly.
As the chat starts sweeping up the place, clean up the place, make sure the yard cut. This get your house in order. Can we talk a little bit about the privacy governance? What am I supposed to be doing now to get my house in order?
All right. The first and foremost is that you have to understand your business, and a lot of us we get very anxious when we see any new laws or any new legislation. We get a lot very anxious. But one of the things that we know is we know our business, right? So we know what our business needs to survive. We have to balance that against what the legislation says. Now, everybody's in business to make a profit, and it doesn't mean that because of this legislation it means I wipe out of your profit. Having putting understanding where your business lie and making alignment between what you have to do and your business goals, what it will do is to enable you to use data responsibly. So you look at your strategy, you determine what you need to do, and ensure that whatever strategic direction you're taking is also aligned with what the legislations are saying. After doing that, have to look at the whole governance perspective.
Can we pull up that slide with the privacy governance so that we can talk through that, Andrew?
Sure, no problem.
The privacy governance slide, which is slide 5.
Next slide.
The next slide.
Yes. All right, great. Thank you. Right. So now we're talking about, identify your vision and your mission that is going to set the stage for your privacy program. Then to identify the stakeholders in the whole process, right? Who are the stakeholders? Who are the persons who are going to be a part of this, the privacy program? All the departments that are going to be impacted. And
it's not just IT, Andrew. It's not just IT that have to worry about this.
Unfortunately, or fortunately for the IT people who get blamed for a lot of things, this has nothing to do with IT. This is a business imperative.
Yes.
So when we look at privacy and private data, we have a tendency to look outward. We're looking at what data we're collecting, but by virtue of having staff, we already have data on our staff, and that data becomes important and also needs to be protected. Once we do that, next we have to look at our team structure. Depending on your organization, you may have several entities within your organization. You could be looking at a localized level where you have you're having privacy within the local entities, or it could be a situation where you have privacy at the group level. You select a framework and then you put in your policies and procedures and the metrics and measures to determine that you are on the right path with privacy. So, and important part of that is what we are doing now, Rochelle, is to get persons more aware, because if you are aware, then you're taking a step in the right direction, that there's something that you must do.
Yeah. And Andrew, this is great information. So when I look at this approach to privacy, if I have a small business, just me, and I have 2 employees, and when I see this approach to privacy, can you just break down for me some of the key things as a small business that I need to be paying attention to at this time?
Okay. As a small business, first and foremost, you look at what services as a small business you offer. And what data are you collecting? Is it necessary that is all the data that you're collecting necessary to provide the service that you're offering? So we talk about fit for purpose. There is data minimization. If you can determine that you only need 2 pieces of data, you only need a name and address, then why collect date of birth? Why collect political affiliation? Why are you going to ask me for my mother's maiden name just to buy a SIM card to put in my phone? You don't need all of that kind of information, because now you're putting yourself at greater exposure by collecting more information than you need. So as a small business, the first approach that I would say to small business, look at your services and look at the data that you need to run your services effectively. What you don't need, then you don't collect. After doing that, it's now looking at how you're going to process this data. Chuck mentioned earlier about data transfer. Some of us use predominantly cloud services, and whilst we're looking at data transfer as us passing data from one place to another, if we're storing it in another jurisdiction, that is considered a data transfer, right, Chuck?
Thank you very much.
It is considered as a data transfer. So if we have
so like when I store things, say on the iCloud, that I don't, the iCloud not there. The iCloud, they're somewhere else.
Exactly. So we talk about iCloud in particular for Apple, but persons talk about cloud services, and cloud really is a bunch of remote servers and storage devices that have your data. No, a lot of us don't even know where that resides. We don't know if it resides in somebody's basement in Timbuktu, or it is here on the island. And we have to be very mindful of that, and to ensure that where this data is being stored, they have adequate laws also that will protect the right of the individual wherever they reside, and for us, for our Jamaican citizens.
Yeah, thanks for that, Andrew.
No worries.
And Chuck, just to bring you in, so Andrew says that this is not one of the things that we can just dump on IT. And in fact, there are several stakeholders in the business. So HR, marketing, this is in larger businesses too, that have to be involved. So any data collection point. But there is the concept of a data protection officer. You're an actual trained data protection officer. Can we talk a little bit about that role of the data protection officer from that general perspective, but also as a small business, how do I go about with the appointment of a data protection officer?
So you are touching on the governance aspect of it again, Rochelle, and I want to segue back to the governance aspect. So the first thing a two-man shop wants to do in terms of governance is between me and you, Rochelle, both of us run this business, one of us needs to be responsible for this data we're collecting. First thing. So if you're running a two-man or a three-man shop, when you go back to your business, you're going to look at your partners and say, guys, I just watched this PSO presentation, and they told us that the first thing we need to do is make somebody responsible. So who is it? And everybody is going to look at that person and said, okay, you watch the presentation, that's you. So that's the first thing. Having done that, you need to satisfy yourself. From a practical point of view, the legislation is coming up. What are the things we need to get in place? So dependent on the nature of the personal data you are processing, you may or may not need a data protection officer. So you need a data protection officer if you are processing large amounts of personal data, or if you are processing sensitive personal data. Sensitive personal data include if you collect people's pictures. Sensitive personal data includes health information and the other information that Andrew went through. So it is in that context that you need a data protection officer as a matter of law. It's not optional. You must apply for data protection officer. That data protection officer, unfortunately, cannot be the head of your IT team.
Mm-hmm.
That data protection officer cannot be your COO. If it is, you have to have a compliance department that sits independent of your business, and the small to medium-sized business doesn't necessarily have a compliance department. You may not have that independent third entity within your body, but it cannot be anybody that actually participates in the processing of the data, because you cannot be asked to drink your own Kool-Aid or overlook the work you are doing. So the role of the data protection officer is really to be that remember the analogy of the crown jewels. So the crown jewels reside in your castle, and the castle is your business. You now need a knight to overlook and be that referee to see how you use those crown jewels. So I represent the interest of the owner of the personal data. I must represent your business as well, and I'm also accountable to the information commissioner. So that data protection officer is really to hold your hand at the beginning and put you in a position to conduct your data protection impact assessment. Now that's a big thing. That was a long phrase that I just used. But it is, think about it. Look at that lovely chain what kind of necklace is that? Let's just assume that
I'm a beads, yeah.
Human.
It's pearl, man. It's pearl.
Pearl. Those are the crown jewels I'm talking about. So you have so many crown jewels that you have to give them out to jewelers. regular,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't necessarily recall where all these crown jewels are. Or so you need, what the data protection officer will do, he will say, okay, you tell me who for crown jewel is that, what other type of jewels do we have, where do we find all of the crown jewels, come everybody tell me what you have.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. What personal data are we collecting?
Yes.
First thing. What personal data we're collecting? After we find out what personal data we're collecting, so where you keep Rochelle jewels?
Yeah.
In the top drawer? No man. So tell me where you really keep. You know who Rochelle Cameron is? You know she's a lawyer, you know she'll sue you. But before she sue you, she'll kill you. If anything to her pearls.
Who have access to our pearls? You have to find out who have access.
Yes.
So do you really think it's safe to be keeping her pearls in your top drawer that's not locked? So you do want to, yeah man, Rochelle have holy for them, Chris. You need to make a determination of, so where are you storing those crown jewels? Are they really safe? So that's the risk assessment. After having done your risk assessment, you now go back and say, okay, we know what data we have, we know where all of it is, we understand what is safe and not safe. Okay, what steps are we going to take to make them safe? Now understand, we have to do all of this on registering. You need to tell the Information Commissioner what personal data you have, how it's moved, where it is in your business, what are the risks. So you have to tell him, you know what, this is a bit iffy, but we have put this in place, and your policies. After that, well, that is what a data protection impact assessment is, going through that process, which becomes very granular.
Yeah.
It's an extremely granular process. So what you want to start doing is understanding firstly what is personal data. Going back to the definition that Andrew gave and just expand on it a little, I often give this analogy or ask this question: of all of the persons listening, who can tell me who is a person who is a short man who used to run downtown? Who is a short man who used to run downtown Rochelle? And some people say used to run all of Jamaica.
I don't know. Oh,
All right. Wrong order.
spell the name wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm just gonna say Chris record, but he's a short.
That used to run downtown.
No,
Right now.
Chris still run downtown.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
his name does start with that. His first name is Christopher. Well, I thought people would recognize that description as being Dodos when I say short man who used to run downtown. So I thought I never knew you grew so far apart, Rochelle. Come on, you need to be.
No, but I mean we moved past there.
That's what I used to.
Yeah.
But the point is, if the majority of your listeners could identify that person, and then you got a business card that's in Shortman that used to run downtown, and you
Personally,
put it in your top drawer, and you can say, Andrew, go and pick up that business card in my top drawer and bring it back to me. That's what a retrievable system is.
Oh.
You can retrieve the information, and the information you're retrieving is personal data. So the first thing is really sitting down and trying to understand what personal data do I have, and it's not to be taken for granted. Once you can start doing that, and as I said, before you do that, assign somebody the responsibility of being in charge for this and accountable for it.
Yeah. So thank you so much for those analogies. Well, we're going to go to some questions that actually tie into what we're discussing, because it's been very engaging and the questions are coming in. I'm going to go back to Max Blake's question, where she asked, with the thrust towards telemedicine, how will patients' electronic records be protected? And I know, Andrew, you do have a slide on protection. So
Yes.
I'm going to hand that question over to you. I think that's slide 7. And if you could just tie it in with how should patient electronic records be protected?
All right. From the perspective, Chuck mentioned you have to do some kind of assessment, whether it be a data privacy impact assessment or risk assessment, what you don't want to do is to be having the job of a donkey cart being done by a Rolls Royce. So you want to ensure that you first and foremost, you know what you have and where the information resides, and then that can help you to determine how you protect. And by protection, we're talking about three primary things. We're talking about the confidentiality, which means that only those who have access to the information can access it when they need. And I like to talk about when we talk about having access, the next thing is having the information available to who needs it when they need it. And we like to talk about information being 100% available. And some persons think of that of having systems up 24/7, but typically that usually means that whenever the person who's duly authorized to access needs to access, they can access 100% of the time, and not necessarily 24/7 availability. So that's the other tenet, availability. The next part is integrity, and the data protection legislation talks about the accuracy of information, and that's what integrity has to do with. So once we understand the data, understand those concepts, is now putting in the controls in place that's going to measure that. And those controls could be one, minimizing the data by ensuring that you only store what you need. Two, you could encrypt the data, which means that you're putting in some reversible algorithm against the data. And three, you're protecting the data in transit. So three things: data in use, data in storage, and data in transit. You want to protect the data along those three veins. And protecting data in transit, if you look at things like a transparent pipe, a transparent pipe basically can look through it and see the type of fluid that's flowing through that pipe, right? If you're using an opaque pipe, you're saying that, listen, the opaque pipe is saying we can't see what is running through the pipe. It could be oil, or it could be water, or it could appear like oil, it could appear like water. If we break that pipe in transmission, we may be able to get the data out, the information out. So in transit, you have two things that you can do. You can protect the pipeline that transmit the data, or you can protect the data itself, or both. When we talk about security, we talk about defense in depth. So we would definitely want to, one, encrypt the data or whatever is flowing through that pipe. We want to encrypt that, and we want to ensure that nobody can see what is flowing through the pipe. And if it should be intercepted in any way, shape, or form, if it gets disrupted, we want to make it so that the data is still protected. We look at things from the perspective of fail open or fail close, or what we call privacy by default. Fail close meaning if you're in a building and the alarm goes off, or a fire alarm for argument's sake, then all the emergency doors and everything becomes active. They relax all the controls on those doors for persons to get out, because you're trying to protect lives before you protect anything else. In privacy scenario, in privacy by default, what you want is the opposite of that. If that pipe breaks, what you want to ensure is that the information is still protected. So it is going to close off all transmission of data and everything without disclosing any information. So
thanks for that very interesting analogy with that pipe. I know as you're talking, and I'm thinking of some of my legal colleagues and some of my medical colleagues too, who may not have necessarily had all of their data in a data transmission pipe, but it is really in a file drawer. And I think a lot of the discussion is about, we keep thinking about data being transmitted through the cloud, etc. Suppose your data is really kept in some file drawers.
Sorry, go ahead, Chuck.
So that's the best case scenario, Rochelle. The reality is, when a patient walks into an office or makes an appointment, a receptionist writes down his name, number, and information, his complaint, where is that data stored? Very often that goes into that one cannot even account for it. After you coming and to see the doctor, you fill out another form setting out the same information. Where does that information go? That information often goes into a box that goes under the secretary's desk. That is the reality that we have to deal with. Okay, similar to that, it may be running, you may enter it into a digital system that the doctor would then look at, and then you generate documents that would then go into a file. But we have to account for all the personal data that's sitting in that box under the secretary's desk on top of the shelf. Because as we have been explaining, that it doesn't only speak to the personal data that has been digitized, but all personal data that comes in. So the first thing that we can do is ensure that you pick up that box or all those boxes that are sitting down in the receptionist's office and put it in a locked room.
Yeah.
And in doing that, Rochelle, you also look at a defense in depth scenario. If you think about your home, you have a front gate, you have a door, you may have a grill that you have to open to go through. You may have dogs, you may have an alarm system, you may have a locked room, you may have a vault. And so if somebody is to break through and to get to that information, they have to pass several controls before they can get to your purpose, right? To your controls. And you want to look at your data in the same way for data that is physically stored, data at rest, whether it be in an electronic filing system or it be in a manual filing system. You want to ensure that there are layers of protection that you have to break before getting to that data.
And you know, say teeth afraid of dogs. So
exactly. And you also have to be careful how you dispose of the data, because I mean, for us that does security assessment, we have found several information pointing to the crown jewels, not necessarily the crown jewels itself, but information pointing to the crown jewels in many garbage bins.
Yes.
So
you need a shredder too. So you need a data dog and you need a shredder. I see a question here, and I think, Andrew, you had mentioned, so I'm going to go through some of the questions. Gillian Jackson, hi, Gillian. You had mentioned large amount of personal data, and Gillian just wanted a bit of clarification on what that means.
It is relative. You have to look. You're in the Jamaican context. We can't even put a figure on it. But if your core business is part of processing personal data, you need to be thinking about a data protection officer. If it is, you only have your employees' data. Okay. If it is you are a two-man shop. However, you sell PIN cards or you facilitate some other high volume transaction business that processes personal data, you want to be thinking about it. But in this scenario, I would not wait to be called to the Information Commissioner's office to make a determination as to whether or not I should have had a data protection officer. If it is, you have more than less if, and we can't use a figure. I'm not going to.
It's difficult. I mean, the context may be different, and it depends on who is interpreting at the particular time and the magnitude of whatever incident that may call the amount of data into question.
Yeah. So. Thank you, Gillian. That was a very good question. I see Natasha Levy. Hi, Natasha. Natasha has a question for the panel. Her question is, do you think that the Data Protection Act will be the death of email marketing?
So that it has spawned several new businesses in Europe, because if not done correctly, if not done in conformity with the act, yes, or the traditional way of email marketing has come to an abrupt halt, full stop. However, if it is done in compliance with the legislation, you are free to do it and take advantage of it. So the quicker you embrace it, understand it, there's a lot of money to be made while other persons may be struggling to get up to date. So you have seen a lot of new businesses that have now latched on to this, where we're looking at lead generators that understand the law and offer lead generation and email marketing services to take advantage of it. But the traditional email marketing as we know it, yes, it's dead. Forget it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the whole COVID pandemic has created a lot of opportunities for a lot of new business, and I think the Data Protection Act is no different. It will provide active opportunities for a lot of companies, but companies who want to remain static, remain the same, and try to do things in the same old way without being mindful of the act, then they're in for some challenges.
So what section 10 provides for is that you are only allowed to approach a customer one time for consent to send marketing material. And so if that person says, no, I'm not interested, you have to have a list that records that no, he's not interested. If he says yes, you need to be able to prove that he has consented to receiving marketing information. So it's just a matter of knowing the rules and following them. But how it's traditionally done, that you just have a list, even your own customer list that you've built up over a period of time, you cannot just continue to be using it in the same manner without following the required processes.
We have another poll here. Has your company formally discussed the implications of the Data Protection Act? And 46% of our viewers said yes, and 54% said no. Chuck, I'm going to give you a question now. Sandra Palmer. Hi, Sandra. I'm seeing your question. We're going to get to your question shortly. Jevon, however, asked, any feedback on how the Act will affect the future of NIDS? Chuck, I think that's for you.
So the reality is that the Act has now made NIDS feasible, because what NIDS did, NIDS gave the government power to collect personal data. However, that would make the government a data controller. The government was not accountable to anybody as to how they treated with our personal data. But now there is a structure, a regime. We now have rights how they use our data, and they can be held accountable if it's not processed in the correct manner. So it will positively impact in the implementation of NIDS. The government just can't arbitrarily use our data or not protect it sufficiently.
Okay. And thank you for that response, Chuck. Sandra Palmer says, can an individual sue for the disclosure of your personal data, whether that is by accident or if the data is sold for telemarketing purposes?
So why you want to sue? The Information Commissioner, has more power than any judge, police, or anyone. The Information Commissioner can investigate the complaint. He can make a determination on the complaint, and then he can then issue certain fines. So why you want to sue somebody that is going to take 6 years or 3 years? The Information Commissioner has a lot of teeth, more so than any other commissioner. So we need to be conscious of the amount of power. Think about Terence Williams being the Information Commissioner and what that means.
Andrew?
I guess it would be the context, the current context. Without an Information Commissioner's office, I think Sandra would probably be asking, what is our recourse now? And I guess some civil action would possibly be it now. But the Data Protection Act, will make that much simpler.
Well, coming out to the same NIDS decision, it has declared our privacy rights as a constitutional right. So you can take out a constitutional motion today.
True that.
Okay. Mans actually also asked a follow-up question where doctors are concerned. How do we deal with sharing of medical data between doctors?
So go back to first base. What is the lawful basis for sharing that data?
Yeah.
And after you ask yourself that, you have to say, but hold on, this is personal sensitive data.
Data.
So not only do you have to bring yourself within one of the lawful bases, but you also need to now cross another hurdle in relation to sensitive personal data. So it could be by way of explicit consent. Explicit consent means that there's a very clear document saying, yes, you can do so for these purposes, or it could be for vital interest. This information is necessary to save that person's life, or other specific reasons. But the beauty about it, there's no ambiguity. It is either provided for in the legislation or it is not. So it is very clear and clears up a lot of ambiguity that
Oh,
prior to now existed.
yeah. As we, it's funny because I know that some of our viewers today thought data protection, how interesting could that be? But we've already gone an hour and it has been such an enlightening conversation. In fact, empowerment, Dr. Smith says she giving us a work. She said the government of Jamaica needs to hire this exact team to the public education trust.
I will publicly share my bank account number.
And I'm sure our business development team is listening keenly to that, and they're drafting up ideas.
So as we're with you now, Andrew, there's one other area that you had touched on, sustaining the data privacy, and I don't want us to leave without looking at that. And I think we have a slide. That was slide 8. If we could just pull that up and you could go through that slide for us.
So in order to sustain, we have to look at
Slide 8. Thank you.
Right. We have to look at monitoring our program. When we put in a privacy program, whether it be a two-man shop or a conglomerate, we have to look at monitoring our compliance. And remember earlier I spoke about having the measures and metrics. We have to look at the risk environment that we operate in. So a lot of this is going to come down to risk management. So you mentioned IT, whether or not this is whether or not this is okay. Chuck, you're hearing me, right?
Yes.
All right, cool. Yeah. So it's going to come down to risk management, right? Then we have to audit. We have to ensure that our privacy operation is in alignment with our strategy. We have to ensure that it's in compliance with our policies and standards, and we have to ensure that there is the communication of whatever those audit finding is, and there's action to the findings, right?
Yeah.
Then we have to communicate the findings and the whole results and everything to the relevant stakeholders. So we have to ensure that there is awareness, and we have to catalog and maintain documents and to train persons in the privacy laws and the privacy program, and to ensure that this process is ongoing. So this is not a one time, we do it and then we forget about it. This has to be ongoing. And as the laws, whether it be the local laws, regional laws, or global laws change, we have to have a framework to monitor those laws and to ensure that we still maintain compliance, and that our program is still effective in sustaining privacy and managing the risks associated with privacy and data protection.
Thank you for that.
And bear in mind, just before you go, Rochelle, bear in mind that most of these acts talk about data protection more than they talk about privacy. The acts are labeled protection, so it gives us that responsibility to ensure that our data is protected. And we also have a responsibility, Chuck mentioned earlier, that whatever controls that we put in for this protection, it has to be tested.
Yes.
It has to be tested. So I urge persons, as you develop your program, as you put in data protection controls, so don't Don't sit back and say, we have put in the controls and we're sure they work. Get them tested.
Exactly.
Privacy, some of us have a good information security regime. We have good information security practices implemented and controls implemented. But being secure is only a part of it. We have to pay attention to the use, to the collection, the use, the transmission, the disclosure, the retention, and the destruction of that data that we have. So it goes beyond the protection that deals with the CIA, confidential integrity and availability. All right. So I'll just leave it there.
Okay. So in other words, when you had given the analogy earlier with the gate and the security system and the dog. So after the person has, you've ensured that you have that gate in place, the big Doberman dog, them, the Rottweilers are there. When persons now have access to this information, your employees and so, how is that information treated within your business? Who actually has access? Do they need to have access to the information? And when it is time to dispose of it, do you just crush up the paper and throw it in the garbage bin? How are you actually disposing of it? Which is such an important point. Chuck and Andrew, this has been a riveting discussion. And before we go, Chuck, let me start with you. What would you like to leave our viewers with this evening as some of the key things that we need to be bearing in mind in the going forward?
The personal data that you have in your business is not yours. You now have a legal obligation to protect it and be responsible for it. You have the second thing is, it is a very involved process. And with your leave, Rochelle, I'm going to share that what Design Privacy is starting is a weekly podcast that would just be bite-sized pieces of information that would take you down that data protection compliance program. So every week you can look out for a Design Privacy Weekly podcast where we'll be breaking it down really into small bits, because the 1 and 2 man shop may not be able to hire a data protection officer or be able to even consult an attorney. So we're just going to be looking at some practical steps that you can take to at least start your journey down the data protection road.
All right, thank you very much for Chuck. Chuck, can you just please tell us exactly, we can find the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, and exactly what is it called so people can sign up for it right now and have it in their list of podcasts?
Design Privacy Weekly.
Okay.
That is it. And it's going to be available on iTunes. It's now available on Podbeans and whole heap of other ones. But the official launch will actually be on Tuesday of next week, right after the holiday.
Okay, that's Tuesday the 20th of October.
Yes, please. Okay. So we just really want to give them small, consumable piece of information that they could actually use in their day-to-day business.
Okay, thank you for that. So Chuck, is this a patty kind of information, or is a heavy box food? Because sometimes it depends on, because I know people really need the information, but sometimes they can't take it too heavy. This is really a nice bite size.
We're talking about cashew and raisins.
Okay.
That you put in your mouth when you want to snack.
Okay.
The box food really going put it is going Clyde and put it, you can't deal with that.
Yeah. So this is a nice bite-sized information. Design Privacy Weekly. It is officially being launched on October 20th, next week. So please sign up for Design Privacy Weekly. Andrew, what do you want to leave our viewers with?
All right. So we've been involved on this journey for a little bit, and we have signed a partnership with the International Association of Privacy Professionals, and we've been offering quite a bit of training, which is more like the box food type thing Chuck talks about, which is going to be necessary. After you finish snacking, you're going to want to have a proper meal, and so we'll invite viewers to check out our website. We have quite a bit of white papers that our internal experts have been putting out in terms of privacy. Check out our LinkedIn pages. We have things coming out for bits and tips, and we are always available to lend our expertise to any internal training like the one you had gone to.
Yeah.
Rochelle, to lend our expertise to whatever organization, whether it be a mom and pop shop or it be a conglomerate, to help you kickstart your program. And when you really need that meal, that feast, we do offer certified information privacy manager training, certified information privacy professional training, certified information privacy technologists for those IT guys who want to ensure the controls are implemented in accordance with the data protection legislation here and abroad. So thanks for that plug.
Yes,
and we'll be checking out. We'll also be checking out
Design Privacy Weekly.
Design Privacy Weekly. We definitely will be
and
checking
you know, gentlemen, one of the things we are also encouraging all our viewers to do in the same way, and I think Andrew, you mentioned it. People have pivoted through COVID, that this legislation, let's not look at it as a hammer over our heads, but let's see the opportunities. Get that training. There may be a business opportunity coming out of it for you. So don't just discard it and look at it only in the context of your own business, but see what opportunities are available. I cannot thank these gentlemen enough. I see Jana Patterson says another loaded and excellently organized COVID cast. Can't wait for next week. Thank you guys for making this a great COVID cast. Anyone says this is a gourmet version of box food on data protection. And Empowerment Dr. Smith says, thanks for a great session after a long day of meeting. This was a energizer. Can you imagine? The Data Protection Act is an energizer. Thank you, gentlemen.
Yes. Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Rochelle. And most of all, thanks for everybody for making this happen. You know, it's been great.
Thank you so much. So viewers, we've had today Chukwuemeka Cameron Chuck, founder of Design Privacy, and please join him for the launch of Design Privacy Weekly next week, Tuesday, October 20th. It's a podcast. We also have Andrew Nooks from Simtai. Please go to their website. They give amazing presentation and training. I can speak with from experience, and we just encourage you to watch this video, watch this broadcast again, but very importantly, comment and share with your people, and not just keep the food to yourself, share the meal. And as Chris says, a reminder, please become a member of the PSOJ. Now, you may be wondering, the information available from this week, is it available in a memo? Please subscribe to SME at psoj.org. The information in this week's episode is priceless. It's a nice little booklet. It's only about 12 pages with the snippets that you can just have by your side to help you in the organization of your business. I'd also like to mention that one of our previous guests, Barrington McIntosh, who had come to us and talked to us about online selling, and people have been asking, how can I get some more information on online selling and how can I be a part of it? And Barrington McIntosh will actually be offering training on online selling. I think we have yes, so the online workshop, how to start selling online. It's time to finally do something about wanting to sell online. This online workshop will be held on October 29th from 3 to 5 p.m. Learn fastest ways to start selling on Amazon, the secret to product visibility, shipping products directly from Jamaica, setting up your Amazon account. This is a can't miss session. And Barrington is giving us first dibs. He's an Amazon top seller. Contact 876. Could put up that side again for me. You know, I can't remember so much things. 367-1190 for more information. ecomworkshopja.com. We'll just drop the information in the comments so that you can reach out for this amazing session. Now, by the way, coming up on November 5th, now we are called COVIDCASTJA, and we are going to be delving with this whole concept of living with COVID. So that's our episode on November 5th. And we are going to be pretty much looking at all aspects of this concept of living with COVID. So we have been hearing or legislators talking about living with COVID, the economic aspects of that, running the business. What does that mean for our health? What does that mean with mandatory wearing of masks? What is this whole COVID about? Because some of us, we have lots of myths that are running through our minds, and this is the demystifying episode about COVID. It cannot be missed. So you can put that episode in your calendar from right now. That is November 5th. We are back here next week, Thursday at 7:30 p.m. for another energizing episode of COVIDCASTJA. We are grateful that you join us every week. If this is your first week and you're wondering, I see episode 28 about data protection. What has been happening? Please visit smallbusinessportal.com. You can find all our previous 27 episodes, plus all the memos, because remember, people learn in different ways. Some people need a piece of paper that they go through. Some people need to see it on a screen. Some people need to see the episode. So we are providing every single way for you to be educated, because we want our small businesses to thrive. So join us every week right here at 7:30, and please go and check out smallbusinessportal.com. I think we have a quick video on smallbusinessportal.com just to remind you what it's all about. So you have a great idea to start a business, but you don't know where to start. We completely understand. You have a lot of questions and almost no answers. Smallbusinessportal.com is here to help. At smallbusinessportal.com, you gain access to information on loans, grants, and investment opportunities from verified financial institutions. Guess what you also get? Useful business tips, access to training. All these services combine to make your business idea into a reality. Start your journey today at smallbusinessportal.com. So start your journey today at smallbusinessportal.com. Do not miss any episode of COVIDCASTJA. Please go back, rewatch the episodes, read those memos, and join us again next week, Thursday at 7:30 p.m. for another episode of COVIDCASTJA. We welcome your feedback. We encourage you, share these episodes, and please ensure that you are a part of that journey, because you will come out on the other side of COVID, not just surviving, but thriving. See you again next week for another episode of COVIDCASTJA. Walk good.